he believes in the great man theory of history, with him as the great man.
You're watching Paul Jacob. This is Common Sense for the last weekend of July 2019.
We did have a good comment from someone, Paul Veazey. He put his full name and his middle initial. It's like, this guy's unafraid, which I like. He said, Trump is not the savior to most Republicans. He is simply a man with many flaws who is nevertheless doing a better job as president than any other recent holder of the office. And Trump is probably not the Antichrist to most Democrats because most of them have little or no respect for the Christ. So they would not even think in terms of an Antichrist. And he's probably, there's some solid kernels of truth on both of those. I won't, the second and the Christ and Antichrist and everything, we didn't mean to be too deep into theology there. But he raises, I think, a very good point about Trump and the way a lot of Republicans view Trump. In fact, a lot of people view Trump, whether they're Republicans or independents, libertarians, Democrats. Most Democrats are going to be very anti-Trump, but there are some Democrats, there are a lot of people in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania who voted for Barack Obama and then Donald Trump. And I think some of them would call themselves Democrats. But what's interesting to me is I have so many friends, acquaintances who despise Donald Trump with a passion and are constantly berating Republicans because they don't hold him to the standard that they held Bill Clinton to. And of course, part of that might be that they don't necessarily believe the allegations made against Donald Trump in terms of womenizing, and they think maybe that his Hollywood video comments were it's not Hollywood video, but whatever the video is, where Access Hollywood, where he said grab him by the, was locker room talk and wasn't really the way he behaves. I've been in locker rooms. I've never talked like that. So I'm not sure that that's an excuse. But the point, I think, is that they want to say somehow you're responsible for every bad thing that Donald Trump ever did, and you should despise him because I despise him. There are all kinds of people who voted for Trump because they thought he was the lesser of two evils, the two people who could have been elected president. I did not vote for Trump, but I agree that he was the lesser of two evils. I don't want to minimize any of the evils he's done, but I have to say I have been pleasantly surprised. And that may be because I had a pretty low bar. I expected his presidency to be an absolute just debacle. And I expected him to govern in a much less conservative, much less limited government way, because he's always talking, he believes in the great man theory of history, with him as the great man. So he doesn't start off with a lot of pluses in my book. Because of his Supreme Court nominations, particularly Gorsuch, I don't think I could have voted for Kavanaugh because of some of his views on criminal justice issues and on the presidency and executive power. Although I think Kavanaugh is, probably in the better half of the court. But Gorsuch, I think, is the best Supreme Court justice now. I think he's the best Supreme Court justice picked in my lifetime. And I'm getting old. So and I think in a lot of other ways, Trump talks in a much more problematic way than he has governed, and that he has acted. But that's my own personal view. The other part of this, and what Mr. Veazey points out and in the comments, is that, and he uses his real name, this is like a gutsy American. And but I think what he points out is that this whole idea that everyone is a Trumpist and is a racist and is just a deplorable who didn't support Hillary Clinton is nonsense, and that a lot of people support Donald Trump hoping that he'll do the right thing, not saying that everything he does is perfect, not endorsing his behavior or demeanor or his word choices, but having a little bit of reasonableness in looking at what he's actually doing, and also being horrified at the big government empowering socialist attitudes on the other side. And that if the choice is between Trump and someone who wants to completely socialize the economy, they're going to pick Trump. Most people are going to pick Trump. I've thought most of the Trump administration that he has no prayer of being reelected, because he's got one big problem. He's not running against Hillary Clinton. Now, I think it is much closer to 50-50 for him to get reelected. And so I think that folks in the media, I think that Democrats who want a Democrat to win have really got to step back and look at why people voted for Trump instead of why they want to rant about why people voted for Trump. People made a logical choice. They didn't agree to marry Donald Trump or to lionize him or to, pressure their kids into becoming just like Donald Trump. He has 60% negatives in that ballpark. He has had, when he started running for president, he had those, I think, on election day. He still has those. He's likely to have them on election day 2020. And yet he may become president. And it's because people are going to make a choice, not because they love Donald Trump, but because they love their country and they're trying to do their best with a lot of rotten choices to pick and to defend themselves and to defend their country. So I just think that it's interesting to be in a place like we are now. We said in our commentary on Friday that that Trump is a sign of the times, and I think that Americans are ready for somebody other than Donald Trump. Whoa, are they ready? But I'm not sure they're going to get someone on the Democratic side that they're going to choose over Donald Trump. I think back to my father, who voted for Donald Trump in the primaries, passed away before the general election, so wasn't able to vote for him in November of 2016. But every child of his, every grandchild, my mom, nobody liked Donald Trump. And I think largely because nobody liked his persona, nobody liked his personality, and nobody really liked his issue set. We liked parts of it, but you were never quite sure. Like, I liked that he sort of seemed like a non-interventionist. And I think he hasn't done so badly, especially relative to other people and how they would have done. I think Hillary Clinton would have been a much more of an interventionist than Donald Trump has been. But it was just hard to really know where he was going to end up. And so kind of saying, gee, I like his issues, you're never quite sure what his issues were. And he's not a free trader, and that was a big deal. But I digress. The key thing was my father's personality and Donald Trump's personality. I cannot think of a wider, chasm between people than those two. And I remember saying to my dad, he says some of these things. I mean, you can't like that. And my dad said, well, of course not. And I think he's a jerk and just some of these things are pitiful and sickening. But he said, our country is in trouble, and there's no one else on that stage who's going to do anything different than has been the case term after term, president after president. Nobody's going to make any change. Nobody's going to whip Washington into shape. And I think, and this is my dad talking, that Trump will do something different and will want, if for no other reason than he's all about his own ego, he's going to want to succeed and to challenge the status quo in ways that no one else will. And to that extent, I think my father was 100% correct that no one, all the others, were different carbon copies of the same, Republican that you could go to the copy machine and just keep printing them off. And Donald Trump was different. And I think that the country looks at things like, I remember before he was even president, before he was inaugurated, but after Election Day, when Boeing was going to charge $400 billion or something for the next version of Air Force One. And he basically told them to stuff it. We're not buying the plane. And I remember there was a little crater, not a big one, but a tiny little blip on the stock price for Boeing. And there were all kinds of people in the media saying, oh, this is outrageous that he's making this public attack on Boeing. I think the average American just about fell off their chair, but got up thrilled that finally someone is in the White House who is like a regular human being and would say, you're crazy, I'm not paying that for a plane. And it's the kind of, other people might say, well, that's not really the key problem in our government deficits. That's a tiny blip. Any reasonable American wants a president in there who says, no, you're not ripping us off. Forget it. We'll use the same plane. We won't buy a new plane, or we'll find someone else who will make a plane cheaper. We're not going to do that. And I mean, we all do that all the time in the marketplace. We want something, but we decide, look, at that price, I'm just not going to do it. And having that kind of personality that's not scared to say something that needs to be said, that's why a lot of people like him. And it's not the Access Hollywood video. That didn't win him a single vote anywhere in the country. And I know that there are people who believe it did. I don't think it did. But his attitude about things, even where we might not want to act quite that same way because we don't want to be that guy. I think there's a lot of people who say, I'm glad there's someone in the White House who's willing to be that guy. Now, on the other hand, sometimes it swerves way outside the lines, and I think that there's some real problems with that. But it again, the thing that I find most disturbing is that the viciousness of politics, the blood sport over the money pot that has led one side, to everybody's a racist, and the other side to not have problems about people being held in completely inhumane conditions on the border, and so on and so on. And it goes to all different topics, but there's a viciousness there that I fear is seeping into regular life. And a lot of times people will talk about Trump. Well, he's normalizing certain things. Well, that normalization of viciousness and of I want what's mine and screw you is not just Trump. It was here long before Trump. There's a good op-ed by Danielle Allen, I think it's Allen, in the Washington Post today, who is a very virulent anti-Trump, but makes the point that this, our political dysfunction is not Trump. It's not all about Trump. He's a sign of that dysfunction. Even if you love him, he's a sign of that dysfunction because he came to the forefront because of that dysfunction. And if you hate him, he's also a sign of that dysfunction. but it's not all about Trump. And that really, I think, is my biggest fear about that Trump could lose in 2020. And there's an awful lot of people who would say, problem solved. I have a guy that I still have some respect for him, but I had a lot more respect for him, who was a big Obama supporter. And after Obama won in 2008, he told me that problem solved, Paul. Problem solved. No, he's not doing anything in politics anymore. We elected Obama. Everything's solved. All the problems are gone. He's going to fix everything. And I just thought, you've got to be crazy. I mean, I wasn't thrilled with Obama as the president. I didn't agree with a lot of his positions. And I think he performed worse than I expected him to even. But if I did support him, it would have been the time to double down and try to help him get his agenda through. I wouldn't have thought that, everything, he's ridden in on his white horse or black horse or whatever horse, and everything's going to be wonderful. That's not how politics works. And part of my fear is that the next president who's not Trump is going to, for a lot of people, be, okay, we solved the problem, everything's wonderful, and they'll go back to sleep. And that's a huge problem. And I look at the media, who I think sometimes has been over the top, not sometimes, every day has been over the top in the way that they've covered Trump. But I can be totally forgiving of that if they will continue to be over the top every day in checking the next president. Because what I see is the just complete difference between the way they covered Obama, who could do no wrong. And of course, he was a much more genial, easier guy to cover for them, but mainly easier to cover for them because they believed in all his policy options. I mean, in other words, they believe the same things. They were on his political team. And we need a tough press, a press that's fact-checking, a press that's going after people and investigating. But it's got to do it all the time. It can't just do it against the guys that it doesn't like who are in office and then be lapdogs for the guys they do like. And so I think it'll be interesting to see whether Trump gets reelected. I think what I'm most afraid of is not that Trump gets defeated, but that Trump gets defeated and that much of the country then goes to sleep and the media goes back to being lapdogs instead of watchdogs.
But that's a problem because people are just so obsessed with the presidency rather than with how things actually work, right?
That is true. That is true. We have gotten to the extent that, everything's about the president. And of course the president's so much easier to cover. We can cover him like a king instead of like a regular human being. And we, the truth is Congress is tough to cover. And it's why I think that a lot of times the American people don't really have any clue what's happening in Congress. And I know from talking to different people and having interacted with some congressmen that I'll bump into somebody at some event and they'll say, well, I really like Congressman, X because he did this. And of course, what they're citing, I agree with. And I say, oh, that was really good. But I've had some dealings with Congressman X, and they're not so good, And I remember years ago, and I'm going to forget the congressman's name, but it's not really important because you see this time and time again. But I was on a GOPAC, Newt Gingrich's old group, a GOPAC conference call. This is before we tangled with Newt Gingrich on term limits, and then of course I wasn't invited to be on GOPAC conference calls, but there was a talk about the minimum wage, and this one congressman was talking, and he said, he gave maybe a 2 or 3 minute little talk about the minimum wage and just battered the whole concept of it as economically foolish and just, and after he finished tearing apart the concept of a minimum wage and of the idea of raising it at the federal level, someone jokingly on the call said, "I guess we know how you're voting." And, good naturedly said that. And he stopped the person and said, "Oh, I haven't made up my mind yet." And I thought, I'm sure everyone else on the call was in the same place. How could you possibly give this argument and then not know where you stand on how you're going to vote? And he then continued to say, it's a lot easier to decide your policy positions when you're a candidate running than when you're a sitting member of Congress. Meaning, I think clearly that he was going to decide his vote depending on whether he thought he could cast the vote he wanted to cast and still be reelected. If he didn't think he could cast a vote against the minimum wage, if he thought casting that vote would get him defeated, he was going to vote for it. He was going to take everything he knew to be right and true and toss it in the garbage can so that he could maintain his position in power. And I remember my mother one time saying, I heard about this congressman, and I really like, he had some, smart thing. It wasn't read the bills, but it was something like that. I think that was Rand Paul, and I don't have any bad stories about Rand Paul, but I just remember hearing that and thinking, well, of course that sounds good, but once you know that this guy, no matter how eloquent he speaks, no matter how right he is about what should be done, he has no commitment to doing the right thing. Well, then, you've got no respect for this person, and you just as soon anyone else serve in that seat. And it just happens again and again and again in Washington. That is so much of the problem.
You've been watching Paul Jacob wrapping up the last full week of July 2019. Read Paul 5 days a week at thisiscommonsense.com. Thank you.